right now. Somewhere within walking distance of where you are sitting, there is a plant that human beings once carried across an entire ocean on purpose. People grew it in royal gardens. Physicians prescribed it. Monks tended it in stone-walled monastery plots in the French and German countryside. For more than 1,000 years, the dandelion was one of the most valued plants in the Western world, a reliable source of food, medicine, and even wine. So, how did this exact same plant end up as the single most hated thing in your front lawn? The bright yellow intruder people spray with poison just to make it disappear. This is the strange, almost backwards story of the dandelion, the healing weed we taught ourselves to hate. Here is the part that makes the whole thing so ironic. The very qualities that made early settlers love this plant. The toughness, the way it grows almost anywhere, the way it refuses to die, are the exact same qualities that would one day make it the enemy of the perfect green lawn. In the 1600s, that stubbornness was a gift. A few hundred years later, it would be treated like an invasion. To understand how upside down this is, you have to start with the name. Because the name alone tells you people once paid close attention to this plant. Look closely at a dandelion leaf, the jagged edges, the row of sharp points running down both sides. To medieval French speakers, those looked like teeth. They called the plant times dent de lion, the tooth of the lion. Say that quickly, over and over, with an English accent, and you get the word we use today, dandelion. A name that survived for centuries, describing a leaf almost nobody bothers to look at anymore. But the more telling name is the scientific one, Taraxacum officinale. Now, that second word, officinale, is not random. In old botanical naming, officinale times was reserved for plants kept in the times officina, the storeroom of a monastery, or an apothecary where medicines were prepared and sold. In other words, the dandelion was not just some plant people noticed. It was filed by name as official medicine. The plant you step over on the way to your car was once catalogued with the same seriousness as the drugs behind a pharmacy counter. And that reputation goes back a very long way. Ancient healers across Eurasia used the dandelion for stomach problems, for the liver, and for the skin. By the 10th and 11th centuries, physicians in the Arab world were writing the plant into their medical texts, recording how it was prepared and what it treated. These were not folk rumors scribbled in a margin. They were entries in some of the most advanced medical writing on Earth at the time. I mean, think about that for a second. While most of the plants in your yard never made it into a single book, this one was being formally studied by the best doctors of the medieval world. By the Middle Ages, the dandelion had earned a permanent spot in European monastery gardens, the closest thing that era had to a research pharmacy. Monks grew it in neat plots alongside the other healing herbs, harvested it, dried it, and turned it into remedies. Herbalists prescribed the root for the liver and the digestion. They used the leaves to flush fluid out of the body, which brings us to one of the plant's more honest nicknames. The French had a second name for the dandelion, not the elegant times dent-de-lion, but times pissenlit, which translates, politely, to wet the bed. It earned that name because the dandelion is a powerful natural diuretic. It makes the body release water fast. Now, to a modern ear, naming a plant after bedwetting sounds like an insult. Back then, it was practically a product review. People wanted that effect. They used it to treat swelling and to support the kidneys. The embarrassing name was, in its own way, a badge of how well the plant worked. And here is something most people never realize about the dandelion. There is no waste in it. Every single part of the plant is edible and was eaten on purpose. The young leaves were harvested as bitter spring greens, packed with vitamins, carrying more vitamin A than spinach, along with healthy amounts of vitamin C and vitamin K. The roots were dug up, dried, roasted, and ground into a drink that looks and tastes remarkably like coffee, with no caffeine at all. And the flowers, those bright yellow heads, were turned into syrups and into dandelion wine, a pale golden country wine that people brewed for generations. That was just the version most people knew. Behind the kitchen and the apothecary, The plant was quietly doing something even more important. In the early spring, when almost nothing else has bloomed yet, the dandelion is one of the first flowers to open. For honeybees and other pollinators waking up hungry after winter, that early yellow bloom can be one of the only food sources available. So the plant was not only feeding people, it was feeding the insects that keep the rest of the food supply alive. Keep that detail in mind, because it becomes important later. So picture where we are, a plant with a noble name, a medical resume spanning 1,000 years, a place in monastery gardens, a full menu of uses, and a job feeding the bees. By any reasonable measure, this was a beloved, prized, useful plant. So when Europeans began crossing the Atlantic to settle in North America, they made a very deliberate decision. They brought it with them. This is the part that genuinely surprises people. The dandelion did not sneak into America. It was not an accident, not a stowaway in someone's cargo. European colonists packed dandelion seeds intentionally and planted them in the soil of the New World, because to them, leaving it behind would have been like leaving behind your medicine cabinet and half your garden. In a strange land, far from home, the dandelion was food they could trust and medicine they understood. And no, I'm not making that up. We crossed an ocean in wooden ships carrying seeds of the plant we now pay companies to destroy. Once it arrived, the dandelion did exactly what it had always done best. It thrived. It spread across fields and forest edges and roadsides, moving westward across the continent over the 1700s and 1800s. Settlers welcomed it. Indigenous peoples adopted it into their own food and medicine traditions once it appeared. For most of American history, a yard full of dandelions was not a problem. It was a pantry. It was a free supply of greens, roots, and remedies growing right outside the door. For a while, that is simply how things stayed. The dandelion was useful, common, and completely unremarkable in the best way. Nobody was at war with it. That peace did not last. So what changed? The plant did not change. The chemistry of the dandelion in the year 1800 was identical to the dandelion of today. What changed was us. Specifically, what changed was a brand new idea about what the ground around a house was supposed to look like. Enter the lawn. For most of human history, the space around your home was for working. You grew food there, you kept animals there, you used it. The idea of a wide stretch of short, uniform, useless grass, grown purely to be looked at, was originally a flex of the wealthy. In Europe, grand estates and aristocratic homes kept sweeping green lawns precisely because they could afford to. A lawn meant land you did not need for survival, and labor you could pay for just to keep it trimmed. It was a way of announcing status without saying a word. For a long time, that kind of lawn stayed where it started, with the rich. But everything was about to flip, because that aristocratic fantasy was about to land in the middle of ordinary life on a massive scale. After World War II, the United States exploded into a building boom. Brand new suburbs spread across the country, street after street of nearly identical houses, each one sitting on its own little rectangle of grass. And along with those houses came an idea that quietly hardened into a rule. A good homeowner, a respectable neighbor, kept a perfect lawn. Green, even, and above all, uniform. One single type of grass and absolutely nothing else. In that new picture of the ideal home, the dandelion suddenly had a problem. It was the wrong color, a flash of yellow in a sea of green. It grew taller than the grass. It dared to look different. The plant had not done anything new. It was the same plant the colonists had treasured, but the standard had shifted underneath it, and overnight, by that standard, it was a flaw, a blemish on the lawn, visible proof to the neighbors that you were not keeping up. And that is the kind of judgment that creates a market. So yeah, not great for the dandelion, because where there is a new anxiety, there is always someone ready to sell you the cure. Around the 1940s, chemists developed a new kind of weed killer, a synthetic compound known as 2,4-D, which arrived for wide use around 1945. What made it remarkable, and what made it perfect for the suburban lawn, was how selective it was. It could kill broadleaf plants like the dandelion, while leaving the narrow blades of grass standing. For the first time, a homeowner could wipe out every dandelion in the yard and keep a flawless carpet of green behind. The lawn care industry seized that moment. Through the 1950s and the decades after, advertising taught an entire generation a brand new emotion: the feeling that a single dandelion in your yard was something to be ashamed of. The bright yellow flower that had once meant medicine, food, and the first meal of spring for the bees was rebranded deliberately as filth, as an enemy. As the thing a chemical in a bottle would heroically destroy for you. Read that again slowly. We did not discover that the dandelion was harmful. We were sold the idea that it was ugly, and then sold the product to kill it. And while millions of people were spraying that yellow flower out of existence, something quieter was happening that almost nobody connected to it. Remember those bees? As lawns got cleaner and more uniform across the country, one of the earliest, most reliable spring food sources for pollinators was being systematically erased, yard by yard, in the name of looking tidy. The plant we were poisoning for being yellow was the same plant feeding the insects we cannot live without. So step back and look at the full shape of this story. A plant that healers studied for over 1,000 years. A plant carried across the Atlantic by people who could not imagine living without it. A plant that fed families and fed bees and earned a noble name. And, in the span of roughly a single century, we rewrote it from medicine into menace. Not because of anything it did, but because of a lawn and the businesses that profited from our shame about that lawn. The good news is that the story is not finished. In recent years, a lot of people have started looking at the dandelion with fresh eyes. Foragers harvest the greens again. Health-conscious cooks roast the roots for that coffee-like drink. Gardeners and beekeepers have begun leaving the early blooms alone on purpose, specifically to feed the pollinators. The same plant your grandparents may have been taught to destroy is quietly being rediscovered as exactly what it always was: useful. If everything you had believed about a plant for your entire life turned out to be backwards, this would be the moment you would start to notice. And maybe that is the real takeaway here. Before we finish the story, do me one favor. If you find these hidden histories of ordinary things as strange and satisfying as I do, subscribe, because this channel is built entirely on the secret lives of objects you walk past every single day. Now, with all of that in mind, look again at that little yellow flower in the grass, because here is where we end up. The dandelion in your lawn is the same plant it has always been. The leaf still looks like the tooth of a lion. The root still tastes like coffee. The flower still feeds the first bees of spring, and it still carries 1,000 years of medicine in its history. Nothing about the plant ever turned against us. The only thing that changed was a story we were told about how the ground around our homes should look and how we should feel about a splash of yellow that refused to ask permission. So the next time you walk past a dandelion pushing up through a crack in the sidewalk, you can see a weed if you want to, or you can see what it actually is. A survivor we once crossed an ocean to keep, still growing, still feeding the bees, still here, long after the lawn forgot why it ever hated it. If you want another story about something ordinary that turns out to be anything but, there is one waiting for you on screen right now. Go watch it.